It is Friday, April 12th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another slippery episode of LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. The April PS Plus Essential lineup is still live on PSN, so make sure you claim those games before they go away. Also, this coming Tuesday, on the 16th, PS Plus Extra and Premium. That lineup will go live on PSN as well, and we know what those games are going to be. So, PS Plus Extra, 13 games. Really 11 if we're counting the titles that, or discounting the titles that are not going to be available right on the 16th, since this is one of the few times where we have a lot of day one debuts on PS Plus. So Dave the Diver, which is an excellent game, coming on PS5, debuting right then and there into PS Plus Extra. Also, as a technicality here, Raji and Ancient Epic is launching as a PS5 native version, so it's already available on PS4, but it will be debuting the PS5 version on Plus, and if you already have the game on PS4, then whether you have Plus or not, you'll be entitled to the PS5 version, but that's good to see. Also, some other standout titles in there, like Noir Play With Your Food, Deliver Us Mars, Lego Marvel's Avengers, Stray Blade, but then going into the next week, April 23rd, that's when Tales of Kenzero Zhao is launching on PS Plus, and then another new title going into May, on May 9th, Animal Well will be debuting not only on PlayStation, but being available on PS Plus Extra as well. Now, going into PS Plus Premium, we have 3 emulated titles: Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare, PS1, Star Wars Rebel Assault 2, The Hidden Empire, PS1, and Medieval PS1 as well, which... You know, Medieval, we saw that pop up on the PSN backend with trophies, so we knew that was going to be showing up at some point, which here it is. And some have, mentioned, why are we getting that game when conceivably we have the PSP version that came out not that long ago? Also, the Medieval remake has the PS1 game basically inside of it, more or less, so you can play the remake but also get access to the PS1 game as well. But as I've said, I kind of feel that it's great to have any sort of permutation of a game available, whether it is a port, remaster, remake, make all those versions available. That way it's available to a modern audience and you can pick and choose which one you would prefer to play. But also, if you enjoy trophies as well, then you can trophy hunt some of your favorite games multiple times and get multiple platinums. And I just think it's always great to accommodate any version of a game if you can do it right. So having said that, still cool to have Medieval and all these day one debuts on PlayStation Plus, which, yeah, as a little starter news story here, Animal Well, that's a new one that we just found out about. So this is something where I don't think we've ever had this many day one debuts on PS Plus Extra since the service relaunched in March 2022. So great to see, obviously. Animal Well is something where it's like a 2D Metroidvania style game, has an almost CRT-like filter to the entire experience, which looks pretty cool, and that one will be debuting on PS Plus on May 9th, which, interesting how sometimes Sony will try and align this in a way where it launches right then and there for that month's entire lineup going live on PSN, but oftentimes there'll be like some little stipulation of, it's actually launching 1 or 2 weeks later, but it will still be available right away on PS Plus, which it's still kind of like rolled into that particular month, but that would still be like 1 week prior to, or a week and a half prior to the May lineup going live, but we're just kind of splitting hairs. Still cool to see another debut for PlayStation Plus Extra. Now, getting into some multi-platform news, which we don't do too often, but in this case it seems like it's at least worth bringing up, and that is Vampire Survivors finally coming to PS4, PS5 this summer, with the recent DLC announcement as well, so that'll be available when this game finally ships on PlayStation. I'm sure most of you know, but the game really blew up when it came out. Very popular, highly addictive. It's a very approachable roguelite where, even if you're not into roguelites, this is the gateway drug into the genre where it's very simple. You're only supposed to survive, and all the skills proc automatically. So really the only control that you have to worry about is the character on screen avoiding other enemies, and it's just, this crazy chaotic action that's all kind of spitballing automatically while you're trying to just keep the character alive for 30 minutes. They're very short runs, feeds into that one more run mentality. It's such a good game, and it's one of those things where, not often, but in the PlayStation landscape, usually things are shipping day one or day and date on PlayStation, considering their install base advantage more often than not. So unless it's a timed exclusive or something, typically it's, coming over. But this was the one really big game, kind of like Roblox in a way, not to the same scale, but it was already available on, Switch, Xbox, PC, really blew up, and now we finally have this one coming to PlayStation. So thought that was worth calling out because this game is so addictive, and I will absolutely buy it for the third time, more or less. In other multi-platform news, we can also mention Sea of Thieves, where right now a closed beta is operating on PSN, where if you do pre-order the game on PSN, then you can get access to this. So it runs from today, the 12th, until the 15th. Rare already outlined a number of things about the closed beta, being that you can make progress that does save and carry over to the final game, just that trophies are not going to be available. But if you do make progress to trophies, then that will still carry over. If you happen to unlock something, or at least you're supposed to unlock something, then it should auto pop by the time the final game comes out. Rare also confirmed you can carry over progress from an Xbox or PC save. So if you've already started playing the game on those platforms, then you can start playing on PlayStation 5 with all that progress. They also confirmed they're supporting the DualSense 3D audio. There is going to be PlayStation only servers as well. So it seems like Rare is really putting together a competent PS5 version of the game. And that's notable because, as we've said before, Rare has never shipped a PlayStation game in the studio's history, and it's a part of Microsoft, now pursuing multi-platform games on what would have been competing platforms, right? Considering Microsoft has been the most agnostic of the big three. But that's a great segue to our next news story, which is it seems like this game might be a key test for Microsoft on if they will or will not bring more games over. So that's according to Tom Warren of The Verge, where sources speaking with him mentioned that Sea of Thieves is being seen internally as a key test on whether to port over more Xbox Game Studio games to PS5 and or Nintendo Switch. Which I'm sure that's the case, as in they're, watching this game closely, see how well it does. It is inherently live service where it's going to have, a large player pool, flooding in with the PlayStation 5 version being available. So I'm sure in a way it's not like they're not going to look at this and analyze it, but I would still put this a little bit into question, if only because we've heard about a handful of other games that are on the way, I should say. I guess like a big one would be Starfield. If that game's coming over, if we're going to get a Starfield PlayStation 5 version that is rumored to be either announced within the coming months and then let's say launched by the end of this year, or maybe Q1 Q2 2025, they would have to be working on that now, right? Like that would already be greenlit. That's kind of our understanding of it right now. So in the here and now, it seems like there's a lot of games that are being made for PlayStation 5 and Nintendo Switch from other Xbox Game Studio developers, but perhaps this initial wave of titles alongside Sea of Thieves will be a big determining factor on if more games will come over from, let's say, a second wave of titles from Xbox Game Studios, which you have to imagine based on pre-order rankings for this game, where it's been doing quite well on PSN. I was even a little bit out of touch with I knew the game was big. It's actually quite successful. I know that. But to suggest that like there's just this swath of PlayStation players like chomping at the bit to play this game didn't seem like that to me, but obviously that's not the case. The game is doing well on PSN, and you got to figure by the time it does come out, just based off sheer install base, that it will probably look very good from Microsoft's point of view to have that many new players coming into the franchise. So between that and a handful of other games that they're planning on doing, and presumably more on the way as part of that first wave, as we're suggesting, that that could be a big determining factor on if they're going to be doing more of these. I mean, the thing is, after them running all these numbers from this sort of, I guess, pilot program, we could call it, you got to, again, figure that if there is some number crunching behind the scenes that implies that maybe there's more upside to not doing this long term, that they will eventually U-turn around the entire initiative. But I suspect that, with the install base and Microsoft's positioning for Xbox as a platform nowadays and being more agnostic overall, we might be seeing this as a gateway to more titles. Moving on to developer Shift Up and their game Stellar Blade, where over on X the team has confirmed that the game has gone gold ahead of its April 26th release. So they are finally done with the game. They actually mentioned that they're a little bit late on posting that because, well, the game is coming out very soon, so they must have been done for quite a bit. But it is nice to see, so congrats to Shift Up over there. And we're also hearing from Tom Henderson, writing for Insider Gaming, that the press now has access to the game, so it seems like review code was probably sent out on Thursday and most of today for those that were going to get the game. And so the review embargo we know is set to April 24th, so 2 days prior to the game coming out, we know where the critical reception will be for this game, which seems like it might review well. It still seems like it could go either way, but at least as far as the public perception goes, there's been a lot of buzz around the game, most of it being positive, but also a lot about, Eve and her body. So a lot of that has been just, well, in a way, it's one of those things where even if it's, bad press, bad press is good press. There's just been a lot of eyes on this game, and it shows because going into our next news story, the research firm Ampere Analysis has been scrapping data from PSN to just, see where the player count for this game is potentially around, given that they are, estimates basically. But for the Stellar Blade demo, it seems like it did peak around 690,000 based on the data from, again, Ampere Analysis, where it's not going to be completely accurate, where they're trying to, again, scrap data from PSN, but daily active users for the demo is around 690,000 as a peak, which for comparison's sake, compared to the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth demo, that peaked at 380,000 on the same methodology from Ampere Analysis. So not concrete numbers, but enough to where we're seeing, based on that comparison alone, a lot of people wanted to play this demo versus, say, Rebirth, which that is something where I guess gets more into the qualitative analysis of both of these games, where, FF7 Rebirth is a well-known established franchise. People know what they're getting into. They will know right away if they want to jump in and play that demo, versus this, where there's a lot more mystery surrounding how does it play. And again, there's been a lot of consternation around the game itself. And so just based off sheer curiosity, that might be why a lot of people are looking to jump in and play that game. But Ampere does try and extrapolate that data based on what the game could be at once it actually does ship at retail and on PSN. And so they are coming up with this figure of a peak player count of 4.01 million, which would be kind of insane. I don't think that is what's going to happen, but then again, you never know, right? Gaming is always a very surprising thing with these, titles that can come out of left field and really blow up in a way that we weren't really expecting. So Stellar Blade, for better or worse, really is in that place, right? So we'll see. But as a jumping off point and going into our next news story, we can also mention for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, patch 1.03 is out for the game, or patch 1.030, I should say, and that does fix the can't stop, won't stop side quest, so the platinum is now achievable again, alongside a number of other fixes. But we can also mention the daily active users for Rebirth in the same Ampere Analysis research study. We saw that since launch for the full game, that peaked at a player count of 2.21 million, which for some are looking at that number to determine how well the game has sold. And so at a bare minimum, based off the player count that they're scrapping from PSN, people logged in playing the game, also looking at trophy data, they're not exactly outlining, how they got this data, but that's probably how they're doing it. So the sort of minimum on what we think Square sold for the game, since they have not outlined anything exact just yet, but the minimum seems to be about 2.21 million, which for 16 we saw it was only a few days where then Square confirmed that they sold 3 million copies of that game. So the minimum here is 2.21, but that number is still a bit dubious considering it's tracking again what's publicly available on PSN. It's a good minimum number to start off at, but we still don't have anything concrete to judge, because there's still so many ways in which PSN can be a bit inconsistent with players that are either not manually syncing trophies or connected online. I mean, so far we've seen from Europe that it was tracking a little bit better than 16, but in Japan it was a decent amount behind it. So I know some want to see right away, like, where does this game really sit? But for now, we don't really have that. But this is one key indicator that might imply the game is doing probably still like a bit worse versus 16 globally speaking. So that's the number we have to zero in on instead of just these particular regions. But for now, that's what we're seeing from Ampere Analysis. Next up, we have a very, very brief update on a China Hero game that has not come out just yet. That would be Lost Soul Aside, where that game has been in development for a long time now, like 6-7 years. Was originally coming out on PS4. Then we got a new trailer, that was July of last year, where more or less we learned that the game is now coming to PS5 and PC, no PS4 version. And while that, at the time, was given a release window of sometime this year, early 2024, which seems like that's not happening clearly. And now we know that's not happening because we have a small update from the China Hero account on X where they say from the game's producer that they'll share more info later this year. So seems like that game is going to need more time in the oven, which we would hope by the time we do hear more about the game. One of those announcements of an announcement, by the time that announcement comes, let's hope it's a new trailer that confirms maybe a release date sounds a bit too optimistic, but perhaps a release window that they feel a lot more confident about. It seems like this game is, probably going to ship, but for what is a 7-year long development cycle, it being one person initially, and then it became a part of the China Hero project, the funding program, right? So I think Sony's probably, doing what they can to get this game out the door, and so maybe we'll get a more positive update by the time this year closes out. Now let's get into this rumor for a possible new Socom entry coming to PlayStation based on what I would consider more speculation, but this happened from the discovery of a Actors Access online profile for David Veitch, an actor, mocap artist, producer that passed away in 2022, unfortunately, but they do have a credit for mocap on their profile listed as Socom 111, where they're a co-star, and Sony is listed as the company. And so that has led many to think that maybe there's a new Socom game, but the problem here is that, Socom 111 could be interpreted as Socom 3, or possibly a weird new naming convention for a new entry in the Socom franchise. Could technically also be a movie or a TV show. That's not confirmed, right? It doesn't say it's a game, but it does say mocap, so that's why we think it's a game. And then also Sony is listed, not SIE. It says co-star, so we don't have a name implied on the project to, tell us what, or I guess a way for us to sort of backtrack that to previous Socom entries and see if that's a way where we can debunk this, because some people did try to do that, where they've looked at the mocap credits for other prior Socom entries, not just 3, but apparently people have looked at every Socom entry and they cannot find David Veitch on any of these games, which does imply that this is possibly something new, because the other angle of this that many are considering is that, while the actor did pass away in 2022, that does not rule out that this could have been, a project in the works for 5-6 years, because games can take that long. So if they did this mocap work in, let's say, late 2021, then this could still be something that is going to come out eventually at some point, given how long game development is. Now, having said all that, I will say I don't think this is actually going to amount to anything. While there is some plausibility with not being able to debunk it from prior credits, because if they're a co-star, then conceivably they should have a credit in prior Socom games. That is a little bit weird. Also, the passing away, it's not old enough to completely debunk it. So I'm not sure how we answer away those things. Maybe it was a game that was starting development but didn't get off the ground, or some other kind of credit, or maybe they did actually provide some work for prior Socom games, and for whatever reason they were not credited as they should have been. I really just don't know how we can explain that away, but this is something where it kind of goes into what has been a historical problem for Socom, especially coming from me, where I've covered PlayStation news every week for a 12-year period. We don't get credible Socom rumors. It just doesn't happen. We never talk about it because nothing ever credible comes up that we can dial back to a reliable source that really does give us a key indicator that Sony is trying to do something with this franchise. It just has not happened. They closed Zipper, and while they do own the IP, we've never seen them try and scout an external studio, build a new team. There's just been nothing there where they've really explored Socom in a meaningful way. I'm sure maybe it's happened. I'm sure talks have happened and things like that, but we don't have anything. I'm inclined to say that Socom is not coming. Also because, I feel like I'm the only one that says this nowadays, but I don't know what you do with Socom in this modern landscape, right? How do you bring that franchise back? I feel like the gameplay, if you stay by the books and really make a proper, new Socom game that feels like Socom, trends in gaming, they change quite often, right? I don't think that gameplay is really going to hold up for a modern audience, right? So while that might be good for, long, diehard Socom fans, I just don't think they would find a sustainable audience. maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm inclined to say that's what would happen with a modern Socom. Now, what if you dramatically change the gameplay and, you know, try and make it more conducive to a modern audience? Well, now you're going to be walking into a lot of negative press for the game not feeling like Socom, right? So I don't know what you do with that franchise. I don't think there's really a place for it nowadays. But either way, I just think this is not really the indicator we were looking for to know for certain if Socom is returning. It just seems like there's enough here to tell us that this is not actually a thing. I mean, I've seen other people propose the idea that, well, what about the Deviation closure? You know, Jason Blundell going over to SIE, poaching a lot of Deviation employees before the closure. Is that this project? And that doesn't line up with, again, when the mocap work was done. So I don't think there's really anything here. If there is, though, we'll keep following it if there's any new discoveries. But for now, I think this is another drop in the bucket of just Socom rumors that aren't actually rumors and they go nowhere. Moving on to Santa Monica Studio, where this past week a number of headlines were made for the studio now posting a number of job listings that appear to show that they're gearing up for a new project. And one of the job listings might also imply that it is a new God of War as well. So if you are looking to work at Santa Monica, then they are looking for a lead audio designer, lead narrative animator, systems design producer, senior animation programmer, senior character artist, senior narrative designer, and senior combat designer as well. And that last one is the one that's generating a lot of headlines because under preferred experience, they write, and I quote here, candidates who are fluent with the combat design choices, systems, mechanics, and enemies in God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok 2022 are preferred. So I think anybody could reasonably say that, hey, they shipped God of War Ragnarok in 2022, did a little bit of, you know, post-launch support for some additional patches and then the Valhalla content, and now they're getting ready to do the next entry while also we have the other part of the studio doing what we assume is Cory Barlog's new IP as well, because that's really the thing that's always been known about Santa Monica for a bit now is that they are doing two projects, and so that is something where we can expect the next God of War is very far away. Based on these job postings, it seems like they're still in that very early phase and acquire talent to start scaling up that project now that they might have a better idea of what it's going to look like. You know, there's always a very small group of people that are going to conceptualize what that next game is going to be, and then the broader studio will also decide if that is the direction they want to go. But, you know, in this case, I would assume a lot of people were then put on the other new IP from Cory Barlog, while again, a small group were conceptualizing what this game is going to be, and then you know, finalizing that, it's a matter of, okay, let's start to scale back up and get this project off the ground. What is funny about the story, though, is that this was the one time where I saw a number of people bring up the very rational discussion of, hey, well, this doesn't necessarily mean it's God of War. You know, a lot of studios will simply want somebody that is, you know, the kind of candidate that is familiar with their games in the past, which means they're familiar with their sort of design principles going into something like combat, right? In this example here. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be God of War, but it might be a better way for that person to integrate with the studio. They're already familiar with their games and how they approach certain elements that is going to be holistically applied to perhaps other projects down the road. Now, again, that's quite valid, but at least in this case, this is the one studio where, I mean, we're talking about a studio that has done Kinetica on PS2, and then God of War, 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 attempted new IP, canceled, God of War, God of War. You know what I mean? Like, this is the one time where it's like, well, okay, but a very safe guess is that this probably is God of War. I would have, if I'm a gambling man, I would probably say it's God of War. So with that in mind, though, this one at least is going to be very far away. For Santa Monica, it's more about, well, I feel it's about them finally managing two teams, which would be, can we have a modern Santa Monica studio that is continuing to release new entries in the God of War franchise, and also finally something new, which that has always been a more exciting prospect to me personally, even though I love God of War, but I do want to see them try something new while maintaining God of War, so we'll see if they're able to do that. Now, this past week has been kind of slow for direct PlayStation news, but as far as broader industry news goes, we've got some pretty big talking points that popped up this past week, like, for example, what the Saber Interactive CEO said to IGN. So speaking with IGN, Matthew Karch was discussing a number of topics, most notably their departure from Embracer, how it was amicable, what he thinks of the CEO. Very good article. I will link that one down below. I implore you all to read it. But the topic that he brought up, which made its own headlines on separate sites, is how he feels $70 games are unsustainable. So he was talking about, where they themselves slot into the sort of middle budget publisher scene, and how he, again, thinks $70 games are unsustainable. So he cites Helldivers 2 as an example of a game that appears to be middle market with its lower price tag, and it did incredibly well. And so he doesn't want to sell their games, that being Space Marine 2, for, let's say, $70, but the concern is that audiences might perceive a lower price point as a lesser quality game. So he says, and I quote here, "I think that as games become more expensive to make, the $70 title is going to go the way of the dodo. I do. I just don't think it's sustainable. Look, you remember the hype for Cyberpunk, which I think actually ultimately performed okay, but when the expectations are so high and so much money is put into one title, it's hugely risky for the company that's doing it. What if it fails? You remember what happened when Ubisoft a couple of years ago, all of their titles slipped out of the year, and then all of a sudden they were in an entirely different place. It's hard to recover from that. I think the market is going to shift to development which is not necessarily lower quality, but there's going to be an emphasis on trying to find ways to reduce costs." Karch also says that while using AI could help reduce costs, he thinks AAA game dev is going to go through a major shift right now, which, big companies are not as nimble as smaller independents or, as he says, middle budget studios and publishers like themselves. So it's a fascinating talking point. It goes more into the sort of AAA concern with rising budgets that are getting, incredibly out of control with how close they're cutting their margins. And it's like such a massive risk for what appears to be very little return. We were seeing this with, Sony's most recent financial report, with how much it costs to make some of these games, and from the Insomniac breach, seeing how much it costs to, make Spider-Man 2, and the projected budgets for future games, which could very well be more than what they are projecting. But it's funny because, we sort of looked at all those things and we thought to ourselves, like, well, $70 is not going away. It's only going to get more expensive. I mean, another big talking point this week that was a point of discussion for many is the highest edition for the new Star Wars Outlaws game, which is like $130, which is the most Ubisoft has thus far ever charged for a game with the highest edition with all the extra goodies and DLC and season passes. Although I think Avatar also had like $130 premium edition or something as well. But it's a lot of money to ask for a single game with all that content, right? So there's that side of the spectrum. I mean, I think a lot of publishers at this point are probably going to explore a number of different avenues to, control costs. There is something that's going to have to give, and now we are like right in the middle of them exploring that. I'd be curious to see what Sony is thinking about doing outside of simply doing layoffs, which they've already done, obviously, which a lot of that can eat into the existing teams that were working on these projects that have yet to ship. That again dials back to the Insomniac breach, where we saw Ted Price was doing what he could to push back on that, saying we're going to lose valuable institutional knowledge. We're going to have to, move people around from the Ratchet team. This is going to hurt our roadmap for Wolverine. And so that's the problem, is that something has to give. Is it really just charging more money for games, especially in this environment of rising interest rates and a living crisis and cost of living getting out of control, groceries being so high, and right? I mean, people are thinking more deliberately about where they spend their money. And look, entertainment is still, like, in many ways a need for people. People have to decompress some way, but gaming, like many other entertainment mediums, is still a luxury. It's a very expensive one nowadays. It's a very expensive proposition, especially with the sheer volume of games coming out. I've always felt that it would have been great to have more games like what Matthew is suggesting, this sort of AA style space that was, really lost throughout the PlayStation 3 and 4 generation, right? A lot of those games just really kind of went away. We also saw a lot of independent studios increase their costs as well, right? I mean, PSN during the PS3 days, a PSN title was typically around $10, and that was the expected price for a lot of small scale games from independent studios, or even well-established names that were publishing on PlayStation Network. But nowadays, a PSN title, it's not unheard of that most of them launch at, $20 to $30, and that's now the new AA style space, right? But there's just so many games coming out, so it's how do you get visibility on the store when so many things are releasing? There's so many ways this can be approached, but obviously Ubisoft, it seems they're going in the charge more money direction, which, ill-conceived as that is, does that really surprise anybody? Right? Like that they would do that, which conceptually it's kind of nuts with this $130 edition where it's a lot of money, but I've always felt pre-ordering from, especially like the PlayStation Store, where the money's as good as gone, because by the time you download the game, you're not getting a refund, at least on PSN, mind you. But it's just conceptually to, put down that much money for what is a base game that you're going to get, but it's more or less a free loan for them, because they're also promising all this content where you have no idea what it's even going to look like by the time it ships a year after the game comes out, which you may not even like the game at that point or care about the content, or maybe the content's going to be bad. So it's just conceptually that's insane, but that's, I guess, where we expect it's going to go, because right now we do have this generation where it brought on the $70 video game, which begrudgingly for many has been the new accepted norm, is that, it's 70 now because this goes into the $70 debate, and the debate has always been a matter of, it's a lot of money. Yes, it will always be a lot of money for anything, but value-wise, and many don't like to admit it, but inflation has made games cheaper than they've ever been, even at $70. And I know right away, as people are furiously typing in the comments, well, what about DLC, microtransactions, all those things that we just listed off? Yes, but even standard-based games, and I will always make this argument, you get so much mileage out of games nowadays, base titles, before any of that extra nonsense. Nobody has ever forced you to download extra content for a game or pay for the extra content. If you buy day one, $70, you are still going to get so much more mileage and hours and content out of those games. Across all genres. Even single player short games nowadays are still so much longer than the $50, $60 game that you would spend on PlayStation 1 back in the day. Granted, there's like RPGs and stuff on PS1 that would be quite long, but I think you understand the point I'm making, right? A lot of titles 20 years ago are very short compared to what is the norm nowadays. A lot of publishers, studios, they feel that pressure to put out something that is just filled with content, and we could get into another, sort of rabbit hole about if there's too much fluff in games and too much bloat and too much uninteresting side content that makes games go from a 10-hour experience to really 20, 30 hours. I understand that that's where it's going to go as well. But the point is, generally across the board, the $70 video game, it is still cheap, but it is a lot of money no matter what we're talking about. The point is, should we expect that, if we're talking about big AAA productions, are we just going to see more aggressive monetizing on top of that price tag? And with digital becoming more and more prevalent, and maybe studios not offering physical prints anymore, which means they're only releasing on a single storefront, which means your buying options for potentially getting that cheaper are now, there's zero chance of the game, going on sale unless the publisher says when you can buy the game for cheaper, which means it might stay $70 for a longer average time on the market. There's that to think about as well. So will it be all of that, or will it be what's being suggested here, which is maybe a lot of bigger studios will explore the smaller price tag and downsize not only the price tag, but also the experience as well to accommodate that smaller price tag? Which I would like to see more of that versus what we have been seeing throughout all of 2023 and 24, which is mass layoffs from what are public companies looking to make some immediate, fixes on their balance sheet. It's awful, but that's another headline that came out from Larian's CEO and their director of publishing, speaking with Stephen Totillo of I want to say Axios, Stephen Totillo of his new newsletter GameFile, that the layoffs they're unavoidable. They're avoidable, I should say, not unavoidable. They're completely avoidable. The way that Larian's been able to navigate this with Baldur's Gate 3 is simply building up reserve funds and not feeling this pressure to deliver revenue targets to shareholders or anything. They're going at their own pace and exploring things within the game, and if they work on a mechanic that doesn't pan out the way they were expecting, they can scrap it, try something different with those reserve funds, and keep everybody paid and happy on the team, and create this dialogue between their player base that are playing the game in early access. And that's how you get a Baldur's Gate 3, which is amazing, and it's a great success story. And I love that Larian's CEO pretty much called it out, where we're talking about publicly traded companies. That's why they did all these layoffs. But it is avoidable. They can simply just not be so pressured to deliver all these targets to shareholders. Just build some reserve funds and let the game development process do what it does best. But it's hard, right? There's so many ways we can talk about this, but what I would like to see is perhaps more of what's being suggested from Matthew Karch at Saber Interactive, which is more AA budget style games, which still by all means take millions and millions of dollars to put together. But let's maybe explore that space before we think about just trying to extract more money out of consumers and also having to bleed off talent from studios as a quick way to control costs. That's what I would like to see, and I think a lot of people would probably enjoy that more as well. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the news stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday video was a very long discussion and look at my PlayStation 4 collection, because apparently a lot of you said, I'm on board, I want to see you go through all those games, so did that. Glad some of you are enjoying that. I suppose I will eventually do other platforms as well. PS3 will take a while. I don't know when I'll do that, though. But that's pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.